Welcome to Simmons Says, where I help emerging and struggling writers create intriguing plots and compelling characters to make their stories hard to put down and even harder to forget. Don't worry, it's not the end of the world. Look, okay, they're not clicking. Personalities are clashing. What can I tell you? Or you've painted yourself into a corner and you don't know which way to go from there, or you don't know how to tell her, or he's found out and everyone's sure he's going to walk out or kill everybody in the room. Or you got some other kind of problem with your first draft, because that's how it goes for a lot of us. First drafts, a lot of people approach it from it's got to be perfect from day one. Hate that word, by the way. No, not day one, the word perfect, right? Okay. But a lot of people strive for that. Don't put the words down on the page until I know they're perfect, until I've got the right ones, just the right ones. Guess what? My theory about writing, the thing that's worked best for me and for a lot of other people who I hold in regard or look up to, first draft is supposed to be a mess. It is. It's supposed to be a mess because you are telling the story to yourself first. Yes, you've heard me say this before. But guess what? Today, I'm going to talk to you about 5 specific mistakes that we tend to make, especially when we're starting out with our first draft. And this can be straight fiction or mystery fiction. So we're going to do a little bit of a bouncing back and forth between fiction, which can be genre, as in romance, comedy, or whatever, or mystery. Hi, I'm Alex Simmons. Welcome to another episode of Simmons Says, where I try to help you figure out what happens next in your story. So let us look at mistakes that writers tend to make with their first draft. Okay. And I'm just going to hit on 5 today. Okay. So let's start with for general fiction, is a weak absence of conflict. Okay, I know sometimes my students or my clients say to me, I really don't want a conflict. I'm really not thinking about the conflict because, it's a couple and it's or relationship between parents and their teen kids or whatever, but there's no shootouts, there's no this, that, or other. And yes, and I know I've covered this before, but you know what? People still make the mistake. They think conflict means fight scene, shootout. No, conflict is resistance. What is your protagonist going up against that is pushing back, holding them back? All right. What is it they want or striving for and can't get there easily? It's not a grease track. There's something holding them back, and it could be something internal, something with them. They are the barrier within this particular story. Now, in general fiction, that's one big problem. If you have a weak conflict, then you don't have enough to push against. So the stakes don't get higher. There's not any tension or suspense building. You just sort of mosey along. And yes, some films do mosey along. But still, you want your protagonists to have some sort of goal or challenge they are trying to achieve within this. And if the tone of the film or the tone of the story is easygoing or sort of slice of life, still for your character, it has to be important to them. It has to be relevant, whatever their age. Something important that they want to acquire or obtain or overcome, and there's pushback. So, okay, when you got a weak conflict, then okay, what are we doing? We're just watching people sort of mumble and mosey, and it's not very compelling. Now, in the mystery range, the equivalent of that is or somebody did something to someone or stole something, and we don't know who did it, to whom, why, or how. So the sleuth has to figure that out. If you got a weak crime, then again, what are we doing? Are we just watching people sort of meander around? Someone gets murdered. Okay, well, that's bad, but we don't really kind of care why it happened, to whom it happened, or who's trying to figure it out. No, we got to build up some tension, some suspense, some desire, eager desire, strong desire to find out what happened, how it happened, and all that. So your crime needs to be well thought out and compelling. All right. So strong conflict, strong crime, solid crime, understanding your crime, understanding your conflict. know what they're up against, know what went wrong by whom and why, and now you have the mechanics to build the rest of your story around. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, telling instead of showing. Now that's kind of in films predominantly. The phrase is show, don't tell. Means we don't want a lot of verbiage. When a film is a visual experience, and oh yeah, there can be words, there can be music, there can be sound, but we're telling a generous portion of the story through the visuals. So you don't want to spend a lot of time with a lot of monologues and nothing visually happening. That's one. Another is if you're writing a screenplay or a teleplay and you have certain things that you want us to know and you feel, oh, I've got to do that through the dialogue or a monologue, okay, fine. But what can you tell us through the visuals? What little things, like for instance, in the backdrop, in someone's office or their home, what items are around that speak to the personality, the mindset of that individual, right? What's happening in the scene that might inform us on another layer or another level something about the story or about the characters, right? Show us things so that we are always involved in the world, intrigued by the world. And the world is telling us things both subliminally and through the auditory exchange between characters. So show, don't just tell, right? As a matter of fact, in film, show more than tell. In books, again, we can do this by having the character take actions, do something physical to give us an indication of a state of mind, attitude, emotions, or it can be facial expressions or body language described in the prose, right? Because we're reading that someone's slumped over, someone's got their head held in their hands, someone's wringing their jacket or something, someone's twisting something, banging on something, someone's gritting their teeth. These are things that tell us a state of mind or an emotional state of being. And we're having, as writers, we are planting certain information into the reader's mind by giving them the actions of the character, the physical movements of the character that are telling us additional information. Right. So that's on the straight fiction side. Right. Now, in the mystery section, okay, the equivalent of that for me would be not laying out the clues properly. Clues can be visual, or something someone says, or something someone does, or something the person didn't do but should have. Those are like four possibilities right there. If, as the writer of a mystery story, we don't lay out the clues along the way fairly, actually have clues that actually pertain to the characters in the crime, laid out along the story properly and fairly, if we don't do that, then we're withholding information or not supplying information because we haven't worked it out. And the reader is suddenly given revelation at the end, and they go, well, how did we get there? How did the detective figure that out? How did whomever is the sleuth in the story figure it? I don't buy this. I don't believe it. And they are pulled out of the story. The visuals in storytelling give us information other than what is spoken, and clues in a mystery are also giving us bits and pieces of information that when we put it together are informing us in a way that maybe we'll get there to solving of the problem or the crime before even the detective or the sleuth does. So you want to be fair that way, but you also want to be aware of how do I lay out the visuals? How do I lay out the clues in whatever the story is that I'm doing? And at some point, I'll tell you, not necessarily in this particular video, but at some point I'll tell you how learning how to tell good mystery stories is a structure and a methodology that works across genres. In comedy, horror, drama, you name it, the structure of a mystery story can be applied to any of those genres. But that's for another time. Okay, let's go with the third one. What's called overloading the story or the descriptions with too much information. Like an information dump, right? We're writing a book or we're writing a screenplay and we are giving all this backstory information about the character. We're giving a lot of information about the setting. We're giving just a ton of information about what the town was like before the actual thing that we're dealing with happened. Some historical, because we're building this world in such finite detail that we're overdoing it, or because we are so in love with the history and the backstory that we come up with that we want to share all that information with you when it's not necessary. Some is necessary, but you want to share the appropriate amount of information, the appropriate amount of backstory information, the appropriate amount of relevant information to what's happening now in the story. Do not try and impress us with all the research you did to be able to do this, because all that does is drag your story down. Now, that's in general, and it also applies to mystery stories. And I'll add one other element in terms of mystery stories. When you get to the middle of a mystery story and you start to find yourself in trouble, it's usually because you haven't worked out the logic to some aspect of the structure that you have developed. Let me explain. If you know how the crime was committed, great. Then you know who did it, how they did it, when they did it, and to whom. Perfect. But you haven't laid out what happened that allows the detective to find clues that will help them eventually solve this. The other thing that you might not have done is worked out the motive as to why your culprit perpetrated the crime they did and how that's affecting them or affecting the supporting characters. Right? There's all of these suspenseful layers that you are trying to build. You are increasing the stakes and the suspense in your story. And that is what takes you through the middle of your story. Act two of your story, whether it's straight fiction or mystery fiction, is the struggle. Act one sets up characters, the world, the conflict. In a mystery story, the crime. And then this act two is the pursuit of the criminal, unraveling the crime, how it was done, who did it, how to capture them, what suspects we have to deal with. Who are these people? Who is the victim? Who are the culprits? Who are the detectives involved, plural or singular? We're learning more about them. We're learning what's at stake for them as you are moving through the middle of your story. So the middle of your story shouldn't sag if what you are doing is further developing character and story, further giving us more information that's going to help us eventually solve this or eventually reach the climax of your story. The middle is the struggle. Come up with enough material about the characters or the crime to get us through the middle, and you should be fine. Number four, this one is tricky. And I'll say this, I know some audience members and I know some creatives who love to create stories or enjoy stories that really, it's about, okay, two people meet, they fall in love, they have a struggle in terms of the relationship to some degree. There's a third person who's, making a sort of a triangle, and which one is he or she going to choose? And, there's some day-to-day stuff and maybe a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but basically they get together at the end and that's it. I just want to watch them do this. Okay, you can do that with a love story. You can do that with a comedy. You can do that with a drama. Eh, it's going to be kind of flat or thin, but you can do that. And there's an audience for that. But again, my pursuit, and again, the pursuit of people that, whose work I really like and I really enjoy, and I'm sure some of you will find it the same, is you want to really be invested in the characters. You want to feel empathy. You want to be engaged with the characters. So once again, you want to know more about, you want to know why. Why are you doing this? What is it about this person that you like or you love? What is getting in the way? Why are you afraid to commit to this relationship? Let me find this out. Let me see how you're going through this. Let me try and understand. And that gets your audience more pulled into the story, pulls them into the story. It makes them more empathetic, and they want to go on the whole ride to see how it turns out. In a mystery story, it's the same thing. You want to find out who did it and how they did it, and are they going to get caught, and how they're going to get caught, and why did you do it? Yeah, there's a movie called Inside Man with Denzel Washington and Clive Owens and Jodie Foster. And I mean, it's got a really great cast, and it's a heist movie. And if you haven't seen it, I mean, it came out some years ago. If you haven't seen it, forgive me. I may be giving away some aspect of it, but hey, it's still enjoyable. But basically, a major portion of the film is the robbers of this bank get caught in the bank, so and the building surrounded by police. So they don't escape after the robbery. They're still trapped in there with hostages. And the whole major portion of the film seems to be about how do we get the hostages out and capture the bad guys? Or are they going to actually get away with this somehow? Or are they going to wind up killing some of the hostages? Damn, how it's really okay. That appears to be the thrust of the story, but there are layers. And the more the story reveals those layers and peels back those layers, and we find out what Jodie Foster's real position in this story is, and we find out how the robbers are, what they're really thinking. We find out how the detective, played by Denzel, is really beginning to key into, wait a minute, there's something else going on here. We get pulled in more and more and more until eventually we start to realize, oh, this is not just a heist. This is about something bigger than that. And their motives for doing this has nothing to do with great wealth. It has to do with X. Oh, whoa, okay. See, so we get a bonus, and the payoff is bigger. So you want your stories to have to say something or to be about something other than the action, other than the basic plot. And that works again for general fiction, drama, comedy, love stories, whatever. And it works the same for mysteries. Some of the twist in a mystery, some of the suspects or the red herrings in a mystery can be about suddenly discovering the why that someone did what they do, why the thief did what he or she did, why the suspect lied, why someone tried to cover up for somebody else. The why. Wow, you did what? Again, more empathy, more connection to the characters. We're more involved in the story. Okay, last one. Last one. Okay. We're at the end of the story, the general fictional story, whatever it may be, and we don't feel like we got what we came for. Right? It's called a broken promise, right? It's unfulfilling. Somehow we get to the end of the picture or the end of the book, and is that all? Or is that's how it's going to work out? Stories tend to make a promise when they start out. I'm going to make you laugh. I'm going to make you cry. I'm going to scare the heck out of you. I'm going to give you an intriguing mystery. By the time this is resolved, you're going to feel differently. You're going to feel like you went on a ride and somehow it was enjoyable and satisfying. You read that book and you got to pass it along because that's satisfying. You want to satisfy your audience. You want to fulfill the promise of the story so that they want to read more or they want to go to more of your films. They want to hear more stories that you want to share. And with mystery stories, and I'm probably not going to say this right, Deus ex machina, right? That's where somehow the story is resolved by a happenstance or an unexpected third party who does X, and whatever our protagonist and antagonist or whatever the lead characters were building and building towards in terms of the end of this story, they're not the ones that deliver it at the end. They don't. Somehow it happens because of this little thing over here. And if it's done really right, okay, that's a twist, and oh, I didn't expect that. That's fine. But we're talking about when, and again, best way to show that in a mystery story is you got the detectives or you got the sleuth, maybe it's somebody trying to clear their name because they've been falsely accused or whatever, and they're closing in on the villain and everything, and then suddenly the villain turns himself in, or the villain has an accident, and nothing that we've been watching our hero go through had anything to do with what happened to the villain, and we're going, oh, okay, we're dissatisfied. The straight fiction is a breaking of the promise of what the story was supposed to do for you or where the story is supposed to take you. And in a mystery story, it's having the resolution occur, having nothing to do with your detectives or your good guys or the person trying to clear themselves. It had nothing to do with anything they did. If you're going to give us a character to root for and follow along in the pursuits of justice or even revenge, then the payoff needs to involve them. As much as possible, they should be a part of the machination that makes that happen, that brings that about. Sherlock Holmes not figuring out at the end of the mystery, if Watson suddenly starts figuring things out, well, what's the point of Holmes? In CSI New York, if they're doing all that stuff in the lab and the regular foot patrolmen do all the work and catch the guys and they say, oh, well, we didn't need the evidence. That's fine. We're cool. We got it. What's the point? If somebody is wooing somebody throughout the whole film, or a doctor is trying to find a cure for a disease that's going to take this child's life, and at the end, suddenly someone from the hometown shows up with an elixir and pours it into the kid's mouth, and hey, I'm cured, I can go home. What's the point? So please fulfill your promise at the end of your story, whatever the genre is. And if you're doing a mystery, if you're doing a mystery story, then please have the resolution, the solving of the case, the solving of the crime be due to the efforts of the protagonist that we've rolled along with, whether that be a hero or an anti-hero. We've been talking about first drafts. So now I will say this to you. After everything that I've said, first draft is supposedly messy, right? Supposed to be messy. So you're telling the story to yourself, you're writing it down, you finish your first draft. It's a mess, but you got most of your ideas down. Now in your rewrites, you can go in and start to make the adjustments and fine tune the parts that don't work, remove things that you don't need, put stuff in that you do, and begin to really mold this and fine tune this into the best work that you can possibly turn out. So some of the things I'm talking about are things that you can fix in the rewrites or that you'll discover in the rewrites. Maybe you don't have all the clues worked out, but as you're working on the story a couple of three, four, five times, you begin, oh, if I do it here, if I have them find this, if I have her say that, it'll work. Think about some of the things that I've said here, and I'll give you this as a printout. These five things, I'll give you a list. And you can click on a link and you'll be able to download this as a PDF giveaway, okay? Thank you for joining me here on Simmons Here and Now. What I'm going to ask you to do is if you have a first draft of something, go through it. See if you made any of the mistakes that I've mentioned today and see what you can do about fixing them. And let me know what you find, or if you got a problem, let me know that and I'll help you work it out. Take care. See you next time on Simmons Says.